Okay, good morning, everyone. This week we've got Eddy Knasel, who's an elder from Horfield Meeting, and he's going to be talking to us about various subjects, but in particularly including peace. Eddy.
Right. I'm just going to get my presentation that I've put some time into doing, um, so that I can get it up. Where is it?
We can restart if you like.
Okay.
Hang on a minute. I
Where's
will
it
pause
gone
it.
to?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Eddy Knasel, an elder from Horfield Meeting, is going to be talking to us today. I think it's going to be a bit connected to the subject of peace. Eddy.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. I've enjoyed putting my presentation together. Um, I've asked Patty asked what she might say about me before the starting, but actually, since a lot of what I've got to say is almost like an autobiography about my whole involvement in specifically in peace protests and whatever. So I'm going to take you through that and how it came to happen and how I feel about it. So I come hot foot from a vigil held yesterday morning outside Elbit Systems factory in Filton. Elbit are the largest Israeli weapons manufacturer, um, and they have a factory actually in Filton. Um, So there's a group of us basically based around a small group of young people who attend Central who have been protesting there fairly regularly. So I'm going to talk you through my background and how I came to be a Quaker and how I feel and I'm going to pick up particular protests that I've taken part on I haven't taken part in many protests during my life, but just a few. One of the reasons I was interested to do this when I was invited to do it is simply that when I was in meeting a few weeks ago, I suddenly realised that the only times I've ever been involved in protests have been when there's been a Labour government, and which is when I get into talking about my background, you'll find the twist that there is about all that because I've been a member of the Labour government, Labour Party, much longer than I've been a Quaker. And I remember my ministry ended by saying, I think it's because I don't expect much of all the others. So, so I'll carry on and talk about that. So, my background. Well, I've got a PhD in psychology, actually. I am actually Dr. Knasel. And
Sorry, before we go any further, can I talk about the background noise that keeps coming? Can we stop that? I think it might be if we muted ourselves except Eddie, it might stop. I don't know.
Hold on, I'll have a go.
But to record it would be nice without them.
thanks, Hattie. It's always a possible that it's my chair you're hearing. So I studied psychology at university and I became particularly interested in the Rogerian approach, which is person-centered and so on. Um, and you'll see why I mentioned that in a few minutes. When I was a student, I can't really remember in detail, but there was a student protest that I was involved in marching about, and that was when Harold Wilson was in power. I actually joined the Labour Party when I was a postgraduate, so that was 50 odd years ago, something like that. I mean, at the back of my mind, I've always got the view that I've actually been a member of the Labour Party bloody sight longer than Keir Starmer has, although I don't have quite as good a first name as he does. Um, and I earned a living basically working in education and training with a particular interest in guidance and counselling skills and so on. The whole person-centered thing. So that's my original background. And I'm going to tell you now about how I found Quakers. I've told many people this story, actually. I got involved in Quakers because my wife took my daughters and some other children and another family to Cadbury World for a day out one summer. Um, and I think it's still the case at Cadbury World that they have stuff about how their attitude to employers was based on the fact that they were Quakers. And Bianca, who is actually is still, I think, is actually on our still. She lives in Manchester now, but she's actually still on our books as a Quaker. And at one point, she actually ran the children's group at Redland. Um, she said, asked some questions about who are the Quakers, are they Christians, and do they believe in God? Anna knew very, very little about Quakers at that point and just said, I really don't know. I just know they're very nice people. And then bizarrely, a couple of days later, a little handbill came through our door with those questions on it, saying, if you'd like to explore these questions, come along to an open day on Saturday, a Hallfield meeting. So we went and found out a bit about Quakers. I was really impressed to meet these really quite elderly women who were absolutely determined to go and get arrested at Faz Lane. I thought, this is different. This is not what I expect to find in a church. So I started to come, and particularly because just the whole business of listening in silence related very strongly to my approach towards counselling work. I could see real connections between the two. The other thing, of course, was that at that time we owned a cottage down in North Devon, where there was the last battle in the English Civil War was actually fought there. And I read something about what happened. There was a key book that I read that was The World Turned Upside Down by Christopher Hill, which explored the thinking of the extraordinary ideas that people were coming up with in the 17th century. And there was all manner of fascinating ideas. The only group that's left is us. And I thought, so I found that really interesting. And I started going, Bianca started going to Hallfield meeting and found the whole thing really interesting. So of course we went with her. And I really thought I'm really involved in it. Like, I really sort of think this is where I belong. You know, that phrase of I found my home. And I became a member in 1996, interestingly, round about the time when we thought it was quite likely that Labour might get in power. And because I'm relatively organised and articulate, I was almost as soon as I took up membership, I was invited to become the assistant monthly meeting clerk. I mean, you know how difficult it is to get people to do. I hadn't at that point learnt that when people ask you to do things as a Quaker, you should think about it, whatever. Anyway, so that's how I found Quakers. I'm really glad that I did. Now, I think I probably was assistant clerk at this point. I remember feeling very uneasy about the possibility of the war in Iraq. And in fact, there was a Labour Party meeting that we went to, which was advertised. Of course, you're not allowed to say that the Prime Minister is going to be in a particular place. It was advertised that there would be a cabinet minister who could come along and would answer our questions on any topic we liked. And I asked Tony Blair, what moral authority do we have to demand that Saddam Hussein should give up his weapons of mass destruction when we have no intention of giving up our own? And he fumbled about for half an hour, not answering the question. And when he'd finished, he came over and made a point of shaking hands with me. And then a little bit after that, there was a lot of us from Bristol went down to one of the major marches against the invasion. And I took my whole family with me. And that was like the first time since university that I'd ever been involved in any kind of protest. And it was an amazing experience. You can see the picture there. London was absolutely full of people marching. And I remember the Guardian saying Tony Blair's found his opposition at last, and it's not the people who expected. And they specifically mentioned the Quakers being there. And it just felt great doing that. And what interested me in particular was the attitude of the police, because they were actually very nice to us, basically, and sort of, I felt they were really quite supporting. So I took part in that. And another thing that happened was there was at that point there was a campaign within the Labour Party about not getting involved in the Iraq War, and I went to a Labour Party meeting actually at Hallfield, and said, well, there was a proposal that we should join that group in Bristol West. And I went along saying, at that point, revealed I was the only person who was actually a member of the Quakers who was actually at that meeting. And I went along saying, I'm very interested in how we end up voting on this one, because you do understand that it may make a difference to whether we're allowed to continue to use this meeting house for our meetings. So yeah, so that was, and I think the fact that I dragged my daughter Bianca along with me has had slightly unfortunate, a slightly unfortunate impact on her, because she's used to the idea of protesting. And she's actually been to some protests in London about Palestine action of late, and I was talking to Sue Parfitt, who I mentioned later, a bit later, about this, and she said, "Well, she's far too young to go around getting arrested. You have to have had your career before you can building up a criminal record." So that was a big thing for me, going to that demonstration. And after I'd been monthly meeting clerk, of course, we stopped being monthly meeting clerks. We stopped being Bristol and Frenchay monthly meeting. We became Bristol area meeting. My father had died in 2008, so I'd inherited some money. And a good friend of mine, with whom I shared the clerkship at what was monthly meeting in those days, suggested to me I might like to join him in going on this is Ben Barman I'm talking about. He suggested to me that I might like to go to this Christian conference that was going on in Israel and Palestine in 2008. And I did go along to that. And it's reasonable to say it changed my whole attitude towards life, actually. The conference was held in Nazareth, Jerusalem, and Bethlehem. There was a key point in my life where we visited the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the holiest place in Christendom. If you believe what they say there, and I don't quite, it marks the spot where Jesus was crucified and buried. Well, I don't believe the Bible actually says that he was buried in the same place that he was crucified. And it's a mess. The responsibility for the building is actually shared between all of the different Christian denominations that are in Jerusalem. And friends, there are at least twice as many denominations in Israel, in Jerusalem, as there are in Bristol. And I came out of it thinking, here we are in the place in the world where we need to be, and it's falling apart because nobody looks after it, because the responsibility is shared between the different denominations. And I came out thinking to myself, here we are, the place in the world where it matters most, and we can't even get this right. And I then sort of realized I was using the word we. When I applied for membership, the big question you were asked in those days was, where would you stand between being a Christian and a Universalist? And my answer was just about on the Christian side, because if you read Faith and Practice, it's so heavily based in Christianity. They would never have got there without the New Testament, I didn't think. So I think just about a Christian, although I think, like most friends, I found most Christian services really tiresome, and there were things I really didn't like. I remember at school when we were singing the hymns, I only used to sing the words I agreed with. And I know I'm not the only Quaker who has that kind of background. So I decided that I was a Christian Quaker at that point. One of the consequences of that was that I was asked to be Hallfield's rep on Churches Together in Hallfield, meeting houses rep on that. And because I'd taken part in that and actually enjoyed is not quite the right word, but I'd got something out of it. At one point, someone in area meeting nominations took me aside and said, "I gather you are now a local rep for Churches Together." And she said, "Well, how would you feel about being our city rep on that?" So I actually was Bristol Quaker's representative on Churches Together in Greater Bristol for 6 years. And that, what I would say is the particular branch of psychology I come from is based on the idea to understand what someone thinks. You have to see how people see things. You have to see the opposite, what the opposite is. And I don't think you really know what you are until you find out what you aren't. So there were certainly branches of Christianity that I am not. I am not an evangelical Christian. So it was a big experience for me. One of the things that happened while I was doing that is I came across a document that had been produced by all the churches in Jerusalem that they'd signed, called the Principles of a Just Peace in Israel-Palestine, the Sabeel document. And I went along to a conference about it in Exeter, where I met somebody called Reverend Sue Parfitt. Now, you may or may not have heard of her. She's in the news all the time because she's an Anglican vicar who is determined to spend some time in prison. She's really looking forward she gets arrested at every protest you can think of, and she's really looking forward to actually going into prison and talking to some of the prisoners and bringing them into the light. Between us, we decided it would be a good idea to set up. There's such a thing as a Kairos community. This is normally individual churches that actually commit themselves to that document. We thought it would be a good idea to set up something that actually covered all the churches in Bristol. So I co-founded Bristol Quaker Community, where we held actually very well attended sessions to find out more about the position of Christians in Israel and Palestine, which is the position of Christians in Israel is very, very difficult indeed. There's a really interesting situation. I think the Israeli government are very happy to have Christian tourists going along to visit the holy sites and all that sort of thing. But they really don't like Christians at all. And I have to say, the whole experience of having been on the West Bank for a bit was very disturbing. I got completely and utterly fed up with people pointing machine guns at me, which is basically what happens a lot in Jerusalem, and actually notably in Hebron and Bethlehem. There are machine gun posts everywhere. I mean, it's a horrible place, basically. I really couldn't stand the place. It's the first time I'd ever been abroad and come back not liking the country I visited. I just felt horribly uncomfortable there. And we had a lot of outside speakers, including both Jews and Palestinians from the occupied territories, who came along and talked about their position. And I always found the Jewish speakers the best, actually, because that's what I'd found in Israel itself, that the opposition there are very clever at the kind of protests that they make. I think we could learn a lot from them about that. And I got very influenced we had some of the speakers come and stay with us, and I got very interested and influenced by meeting them, and became more and more committed to what I would call the Palestinian cause, one way or another. And I think Bristol Quaker Community was very successful in getting the messages across to a certain kind of Christian. The guy I got on best with was the Catholic bishop. I've forgotten his name now, but he had a habit every year of taking priests, not just Catholic priests, but including some Anglicans, on an annual trip to the land once called Holy, as Garth Hewitt called it. And he would talk about how, well, we were just walking this particular direction. We were just going to go and visit something. And the army came over and told us they couldn't go there because it was a military site and whatever. So I became really influenced and committed to the idea of peace in that area, because I feel the Christian community is in a unique position because it sort of has a foot in both sides, as it were. And there's a real belief that the Christians in Israel, Palestine could be the key to a long-term peace. So I got very heavily involved in that and organized it, and it did influence my way of thinking about things. I've learned an awful lot through it. I'm going to mention Palestine Action. Now, what I'm going to say about Palestine Action is a little bit more nuanced after a few things I found yesterday. When Palestine Action is, it's a prescribed organization that's been labeled as being terrorist by the government. And when a couple of years ago, There was a young couple who came and stayed with us who were awaiting trial. They had actually stood outside the Albert head office, which was in Aztec West in those days. And all they had done was they'd acted as sort of just to watch while some people went in and did things to the computers in the offices and whatever. And they were two of the nicest kind of people I've ever met. There's another good friend. There's another young woman actually who I know, who's the daughter of a good friend of ours who'd actually visited Israel Palestine, and become very committed to the Palestine cause. Now, their daughter is a member of Palestine Action, and she's awaiting trial at the moment as well. I object to the idea that they've been a prescribed organisation and described as terrorists. I mean, they are certainly not all terrorists. But what I did find out yesterday is that there's a second level of, you're not allowed to actually take pictures at Little Bits factory. And that's largely because our government is actually one of their main, Elbit UK is a subsidiary of this big Israeli manufacturer of drones, basically. They make our drones, and therefore their premises are covered by the Official Secrets Act. And when we're protesting there, we must not take a picture of the factory, because the first time we went, the police came along and basically advised us, please don't take a picture of that building because it's covered by the Official Secrets Act and we'd have to arrest you then. So I have very mixed feelings about that. And I just think it's ridiculous that they're being described legally as being terrorists. My own view is they are very naive in terms of how they go about doing their protests. I think I was saying before we started that we Quakers know how to do protests. We've been doing it for over 300 years, and we've worked out the ways of doing it. And you can make the point. The point we've been making standing outside at Elbit is to let people know that there's actually an Israeli company in this city, and they're actually all over the country, in fact, who are making weapons for us. And people, I think, don't know that, and I don't think enough people know that. So yes, I don't. When it came, now there's a group of young Quaker young friends at Central who want to get involved in living our peace testimony actively, and they wanted to do some protest, and they thought Palestine was one that was a topic that they would like to focus on. That has led to the institution of, oh, sorry, I was going to talk about this next. I thought my marching days were over. I mean, I had a brain hemorrhage back in 2009, in fact, and I don't walk very well, so I can't really take part in marches. Last year, there was a great opportunity for me to actually go out and speak truth to power. Because you remember what happened to our meeting house in Westminster, where the police broke in and arrested a group of young people holding a meeting about peace. And they didn't warn anybody. They actually damaged the building. And so friends in Bristol decided, let's go and protest outside the police station in the city centre. And I thought, well, I ought to go to that, didn't I? So I did go to that. And I found it a really deeply spiritually moving experience that was just standing there in silence. And there were a number of people who came and walked up into us and asked, well, what are you Quakers doing here? That sort of thing. And we explained, because people didn't know what had happened. And I came back feeling great. I've really done something useful for a change. So when the opportunity came to now we have been protesting outside Elbit once a month for the last 3 months. The police have known we were coming. I don't think we ever informed them we were coming. The first time we went, there were two. Now, what's the thing that's not being a police constable? Community, whatever they are. Two of them were stood there and came over and advised us about what we could and couldn't do. The other interesting thing was, we hadn't publicised we were doing it at all, but the security guards were out there. So somehow or other they found out we were going to be there. This is a picture I took yesterday of the police presence when we were there yesterday. So there was they took it in turns, there's more than one of them. There were some police officers in a car who must have spent one of the most boring hour and a halves of their life sitting around waiting for us to, well, because we actually were silent. I actually acted as the elder yesterday and read out sort of something about saying, we're going to stand here for an hour and a half. There were friends there, Sue Parfitt in particular, who are not Quakers and are not used to how we work. We always describe it as silent worship, don't we? It's actually still worship, I think, because our meetings are rarely silent. People usually do give some ministry at some point. So I gave a kind of explanation of we're going to stand in silence, but if the Spirit moves you to speak, feel free to speak. And yeah, we've been doing that. I'll say a bit about who Bristol Friends of Palestine are. We're not calling ourselves specifically Quakers. I mean, we see it as a Quaker-led demonstration. What's been interesting is that factory, I think most people don't know what it does. It's on a roundabout, and there's a sign up we have up saying "honk if you're against genocide." Of course, Quakers are the first church to actually make an official statement saying that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. So this little group has sort of set up, and it's actually friends from right across the area meeting that are going. We haven't yet taken it to area meeting because we feel we need to have to officially endorse what we're doing or be aware of what we're doing, because we feel we ought to have some sort of document that says what we're about and so on. And it's basically led by young Quakers, basically, which I think is really exciting and says volumes. It's really encouraging about how we might have a future. I remember this year I think it was, we had the recording clerk come along and talk to us about imagine what will be like in 30 years' time. Well, of course, most of us won't be around in 30 years' time, will we? And if you look at the average age of Quakers, it's not just Quakers, it's Christian groups in general. I mean, our age profile is a little bit older than others, mainly because, in fact, people come to Quakers. For a lot of people, Quakers is the final step in their spiritual journey. We're the ones that we finish with, essentially. So, I mean, we need young blood. We need young people coming in and taking our place. I'm very aware that as one of the older people at Hallfield, that I'm not going to be as inspiring as those inspiring women I met right at the beginning. I really thought there was something amazing about that. So what we stand for, and we are actually writing and agreeing a formal kind of statement of what we're about. Some discussion about whether, I mean, I'd been over it and made some suggestion that we shouldn't just talk about Gaza, we should talk about Palestine as a whole. And it shouldn't be just restricted to Gaza. Because I personally am equally, almost as concerned. I'm obviously desperately concerned about what's going on in Gaza. I went to a talk a couple of weeks ago given by a doctor an English doctor who's volunteering in the main hospital in Gaza, and he talked about the conditions there. I cannot believe human beings can behave the way they're behaving there. When they bomb the hospital, it's just the first stage. They then send the troops in to actually destroy the equipment, and they carry off the actual Palestinian doctors and imprison them and torture them for months. I can't begin. It makes me worry about the statement, there is that of God in everyone. I'm almost thinking of changing it to there is that of God and Satan in everyone. It made me, I cannot understand how people can behave that badly. So what we've been doing is once a month, we stand outside the Elbit factory. And what's been happening, of course, is because it's a roundabout, there's a sign up saying, honk if you're against genocide. And a, a good quarter of the cars that go round do blow their horns. Yesterday we had a couple of people who came round and were just plain abusive. I can't remember exactly what they said, and I don't want to use language quite like what they were using. I think one of the people who objected thought we were complaining about immigration, about we were supporting immigrants or something. Shouted out something like, "You wouldn't want those people staying in your homes, would you?" And when I think about, well, I have had Palestinians staying in my home, and I would like that. I've been very happy to have them standing there.
To do something on
So that's my journey in terms of I've been really grateful to the group to allow me to actually express my faith in that way. And actually, we were in silence the whole hour and a half yesterday, and I think that was the first time that we'd actually been properly silent. And I think we all found it particularly moving that it was silent. And there is something very powerful about what we're doing, not just for us, but I think the fact these people are coming around and finding out why we're there, or at least seeing the banners and supporting it. And I think that's very important, you know. So I'm really pleased to share ideas about that. So that's the end of the presentation. Any questions, friends?
Thank you, Eddie. I just unmuted, so if the crackles come back, let me know. I don't know if it was my computer or not, because I hadn't actually turned it off like I'm supposed to. Okay, who would like to? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Who would like to go first?
I'm sure there's people. You select. Are you chairing?
We don't have anyone else.
Okay.
I should perhaps explain, friends, that Hattie and I live in the same street.
Yeah, and I went up to Elbit yesterday for the first time. Well, I didn't even know that Elbit was owned essentially by Israelis.
Yes.
It's an Israeli company.
Yes.
So that's a first, because I just thought it was a company making arms and selling to Israel. No. Okay. So that's the first thing. But I several questions. The world turned upside down by somebody Hill.
Christopher Hill.
Fiss?
Christopher Hill. He's
Christopher.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's a Marxist historian who was absolutely fascinated in understanding the absolute melting pot of ideas, many of them which were very, very modern indeed.
Yeah.
By people like the Levelers and the Diggers and so on.
Yeah.
And I'd recommend it to anybody. It's almost an alternative history of the origins of Quakers. I mean, he wouldn't see it that way. He says something right in the introduction. He says something along the lines of, "It's important to understand that an early Quaker would have had more in common with a ranter than they would do with a modern day membership to the Society of Friends." I would recommend it to anybody, and I'll lend you my copy if you like, if I haven't already lent it to somebody already.
Yeah, I've just borrowed the Reluctant Fundamentalists. So
Right.
I'll skip through that for a moment.
Yeah.
That's good. And then what does Sabil mean?
Yes. It's a Greek word which is used in the New Testament, and it actually is untranslatable. It's a word that Jesus used, and the nearest translation is time of decision. The background on that is that's what what the interchurch group in South Africa called themselves. They called themselves the Sabil group, and there are connections between the opposition in the Christian opposition in Israel and South Africa. Desmond Tutu was a refused admission to Israel. So that's what the word means. It's a time of decision, and it has that meaning because it was actually really quite important in what happened in South Africa. Um, and I think I've forgotten there was an important South African who said the world cannot be free until Israel is free. Shall I share with you what I feel about the peace deal? Um, uh, well, I think I've read the terms of the five things at the five stages. One of those stages is Gaza being run by President Trump and Tony Blair. If the people who put that they think had talked to any Arab about Tony Blair, they'd know that he would not be acceptable. Let's be clear about that. I think there are real problems about the deal. Firstly, I mean, I have no time whatsoever for Hamas either. I mean, they are religious fundamentalists, and I don't like fundamentalism. Uh, David Mowat tried to set up a little group, set up a group of us who would talk to some women in Palestine, in Gaza, at least one of whom is now dead. Um, and I went to the first online meeting we had with them. And after a while, I realized we were talking about peace and they were talking about victory
Mm.
because they really thought they could win a war. They could win a war against Israel, which to me said two things. One, it emphasizes the fact that that part of the world has been cut off from the outside world for years now. What used to be happening was you could tell when there was an arms fair coming up because the Israelis would go over and bomb it. The Israelis pulled out of Gaza so they could do things like that. The other thing, of course, is that Hamas was originally had some backhanded funding from the Israeli government because Netanyahu wanted an opposition to the PLO. And the first thing they did when they were elected was they forcibly evicted the PLO. And what's been going on since is that when people have been arrested Palestinians have been arrested from the West Bank, they've been released actually in Gaza, which of course, since you can't get in or out of Gaza, is no form of release whatsoever. So I don't. I watched a documentary. You may remember when Trump decided that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Um, uh, there was an attempt for there to be a march from people from Gaza to Jerusalem,
Can you mute?
which and that, there was a film of this, and Hamas basically took because they have this Arabic belief in the power of martyrdom. They they asked Gazans to go to particular places where they knew perfectly well there'd be machine guns pointing at them because they wanted there to be martyrs. I have no time for that attitude whatsoever. Um, it, because you support one side, because you have empathy with the people, doesn't mean that you support military action at all. I mean, you know what? So I think it won't happen because I don't think Hamas know where all of the hostages are. They certainly don't know where all the bodies are. How would you? So it won't happen. And I might be wrong with that, of course, but Netanyahu has no intention of there being a state of Palestine at all. Most of his career has been about ending all possibility of a two-state solution. And I just don't believe it's ever going to happen. And I really worry about what's going to happen in the West Bank. Because I was shocked when I went there. I went to what are called refugee camps. They're not refugee camps, they're villages. I mean, they're proper permanent buildings and whatever. To me, my idea of a refugee camp is it's a lot of people in temporary accommodation. It really isn't. But if you go to the West Bank, as I have done, there's an immense contrast between the so-called refugee camps, which I say are villages, um, and the settlements, the illegal, well, they are the illegal settlements. When I did Thought for the Day, I was not allowed to call them illegal settlements, because the head of the station. The only times I ever had any arguments about my scripts, you have to have your script approved the day before. The only times I ever had any problems getting a script clear were when I wanted to say something about Israel. The first time I had an argument, it's the only time I've ever had an argument with Tim about a script, and he said, "Eddie, if I didn't know better, I get the impression you were arguing that the Jews don't like Christians." And I wish I'd had the gumption to say, "And what is it we've done the last 2,000 years, Tim, that would make them like us?" And so my wife and I went off to the pub, and I then got a phone call as I was leaving saying, "Eddie, sorry, there's been a mistake. It's not you tomorrow, but you can use that script any other time you like." Well, you can't, because it's meant to be linked to things. The other occasion when I tried to do something was when Yearly Meeting produced a list of Jewish organizations in the West Bank that were posing as being Palestinians. It's a very Quakerly way of producing the list that's saying you might like to consider boycotting them. And I did a script about that. And I had to check it had to be a script. It was going out on Monday, and I had to contact Tim on a Sunday. I read it out to him, and he said, "Eddie, have you got that on a Word file? Because you do understand you have to go over every single word, don't you?" And he said, "Eddie, don't worry." He rang me back at 11 o'clock at night and said, "Eddie, don't worry, I've made the changes to the script. So you just read out what again." What he changed was he changed the word the word Zionist to Jew, which is exactly what I didn't want to say. So when I actually read it out, I did actually say Zionist. He said, "Because how do we know they're Zionists?" Well, if why on earth would you want to go? Would you want to be in what is clearly an active attempt to take over the occupied territories? Why would you do that if you weren't a Zionist? And why say Jew? I know plenty of Jews who are not Zionists in that sense at all. Ron Mendel is a really good friend of mine, is very, very active in all this sort of thing. He's a New York Jew. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, enough about all that. I'm blithering, aren't I? Any other questions?
So, hello, it's been very interesting listening to you, Eddie. I was out on the West Bank last year as an EA, ecumenical accompanier, doing the human rights monitoring. And I completely agree with you that whatever happens in Gaza, and I'll be very surprised and delighted if there is a full peace process and if there is a two-state solution at the end of it. But I think personally that once Israel has got its hostages out, however many there are, they will just use any excuse to carry on bombing. I mean, anyway, but on the West Bank, we must not forget that, because I was in touch, but we used to visit a Bedouin community twice a week that was under threat, and they're part of the E1 corridor now, which Israel decided in August to push ahead with, which is going to basically cut the West Bank in two, which will make it by clearing all the Bedouin and everybody else out of the area between Jerusalem eastwards to the country of Jordan, and that will be. And Smotrich, I think it was, said we want to bury the two-state solution by doing this. It's a explicit aim, which is very depressing, really. There seems to be there are many groups in Israel that are pro-human rights and that are against the occupation. Some of them are working jointly. There are joint groups with Palestinians. There are a lot of people in Palestine and Israel who would like to see a peaceful solution, but a just solution. And the figures just hang in my mind. I think, well, if 750,000 Palestinians were made homeless by being forcibly evicted in the Nakba, and there are 700,000 homes, Israelis illegally housed on the West Bank. One solution would be just to say, well, the Israelis always knew the settlements were illegal anyway under international law, so why don't they just boot them out, get back to the 1949 borders, and let Palestinians live in those homes? That would, to me, seem a much more just, equitable solution.
Of course, the difficulty is historically that the original idea was that it was a two-state solution, and the Palestinians actually rejected it.
Yes, but time moves on, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
You've got to go from where we are now and not just keep.
I mean, if I was mobile properly, I'd really been very keen to be an EA myself, but I don't know that I've been much use to anybody because I really don't. I have problems walking altogether, but that's where my heart is. I actually see the kind of you've heard of Jeff Halper? He's
I'm not sure.
He's an American Jew who lives in Jerusalem, and what he's proposing is a genuinely democratic single state. I mean, I think one of the jobs of those of us of faith is to have an idea of what heaven would be like. And I think for me, it belongs in that sort of category. It's great to have an idea of what an ideal situation would be. I don't know. I mean, I know, I remember that the night that I was in Bethlehem, there was a group of us, the conference I went to, there were meant to be speakers from all parts. There were meant to be speakers from Gaza there. And of course they weren't, because they weren't allowed out. And there was a little group, well, not a little, it was quite a large group of us who decided, well, if they can't come to the conference, let's set a conference in Gaza. And they hired a coach to actually take people to stand with a vigil outside the walls. And at one point, I actually had my name down to go on that. The complicating personal factor was I was ringing my wife up every morning to say how things were, how I was getting on. The day before, my youngest daughter had stomped out of the house with her boyfriend saying, "Goodbye, Mum, we're not coming back." So I rang Gabriella and said, Gabs, if you want to, she said, Mum was being completely unreasonable. I said, if you want to see things about people being unreasonable, come here. And I felt I couldn't ring Anna up and sort of say, it's 11 o'clock at night, saying you won't be able to ring me at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning because I'm going to be at Gaza. I didn't think I could do that. I regret that I didn't. Apparently, it was very powerful. People did just worship in silence outside the walls and whatever. Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think I can't see there being a state of. I mean, I think it's really important that Britain has recognised the state of Palestine at last, and others are doing the same. But it ain't going to happen. I think we knew then that what was going to happen back in 2008, how things were going to end up in Gaza. And it's just horrific that it's actually happening within my lifetime. I mean, it's always been their intention from the moment they pulled out of Gaza to actually bulldoze the place. It ain't going to be this wonderful, wonderful holiday destination that everybody who's not actually Palestinian in the world will want to go to that Trump seems to envisage. Yeah. So I would recommend anybody to get involved in peaceful protest. As I say, I think we know how to do it. There's a group called Turning the Tide that have ideas about that train people in how to do peaceful protests and whatever. And I think I'm just very grateful for the opportunity that this group has given me to actually do something like that. As I said, my daughter's got involved in it, and she's been doing things like she's been amongst the groups in London, holding up with signs saying we support Palestine action, and the police have been going along and arresting them one by one. she would have been arrested the first time they did that if she hadn't decided to leave the group and go to the loo, and the police wouldn't let her back in then. But I mean, but as Sue Parfitt said, she's too old to do. She's too young to do that. You can only really do things like that when you're not working anymore. And yeah, so yeah, I think I felt really lifted from the worship we did yesterday.
Thanks very much, Eddie. I'm very, very grateful. Really enjoyed that, and I feel I know a great deal more than I did when we started. I've also noted down various organisations I'm going to be contacting. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Patsy. I've really appreciated it.
Could I just say one thing? That at a Northwest London area Quaker meeting, I met somebody who is a national journalist, a Quaker, and she talked to me about what was happening on the West Bank and wrote a very good article in the New Statesman at the end of August about, I think it's called Exile on the West Bank, about what's happening to the Bedouin there, which is a very good article. So her name is Lamorna Ash, Lamorna Ash. So if you search for that in the New Statesman, I think they let you look at 2 articles for free before you have to pay anything. It was on the 27th of August, the date.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Yes, thank you. That's brilliant. Okay, I suppose I'd better tell you, I'm now looking worriedly around to see which piece of paper I put it on. I'm surrounded by bits of paper, and sure enough, the bit of paper I want isn't with inside. Next week, though, we are online to Zambia, and we're going to be talking to people running a school there. Some of the children are hoping to take part. I'm going to do some extra work on advertising this over the coming week. So if you could encourage as many of us as possible to come next week, because it's great to acknowledge when people try and do something internationally. So I would love you to do that. I'm extremely sorry that I couldn't. I just don't know what I've done with the piece of paper on which I wrote down all the details, especially ready to read out to you. I am very sorry.
Could I?
Yes, yeah. Have you got it in front of you?
No, I haven't, but I've got an email from Chris.
Oh, great.
Chris Barrell is somebody who I know because I volunteered in Zambia, and he set up a charity to take over, to take over the funding of a school that was being funded by a different charity. And he says he's reasonable he says, I've been doing a bit of testing to check how the Zoom meeting might work with us. Here we have poor network, variable electricity, etc. I don't want to oversell things in case it becomes just a UK presentation, but at any rate, we will get a presentation next week. I'm reasonably confident that it will work. I've sent a bit more information to Patsy. By the way, I understand that P's relates purely to the fact that all the Sianga children have names beginning with P. I know. I'm amazed because I wondered why the school was called PIZZ. He hopes the talk will be informative and possibly a little entertaining.
Okay.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Hattie. That's great. Thank you. Okay. I think that's it then. And thank you very much indeed. And this will be posting. I will be getting it done by David, that is, to be posted so that you will be able to read it later on and tell friends about it as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Right.
Thank you, Eddie.
Right, I'm going to go now. I've got a gym to go to. Thank you very much.
Okay.